Hi guys, I hope you're all doing well. It's me, Rylan. I'm aware I have not been uploading as many videos lately, but that can be attributed to me wanting to focus more on my schoolwork and also just generally things outside of YouTube. Now, my intention for this video was I wanted to showcase all my obscure 60s garage rock slash psych records, and my reasoning behind that is sometimes it becomes annoying to look back through previous videos, which I did showcasing vinyl records, and be like, okay, what did I include there? And what am I gonna have to, um, show later, I guess. But I haven't made one of these vinyl update videos in a while, so I just figured I'd come on and kind of do everything in one shot. Um, I hope you guys do enjoy these videos to some extent, because occasionally I kind of feel guilty about showcasing stuff because I understand that there's people who are less fortunate than me that um, like might like to be in a better position where they could obtain these records, I suppose. Um, but no mistakes about it. I'm very grateful to have all these records. Um, so without further ado, let's jump right off into the deep end into some 60s garage rock from Texas with the 13th Floor Elevators picture disc. I picked this one up probably about 2 months ago at a record sale, and I found the artwork on the front particularly interesting. But I also happen to be familiar with the song on the back, You're Gonna Miss Me, which is just like probably one of the best garage punkers from 1966. And that's saying something because there are a lot of good garage punkers from 1966. The second of these is I've been meaning to keep the artists somewhat together, but this kind of slipped away. Um, the Poppers, Ellis Island. This is a Canadian band from Toronto. Um, really solid album, but also a real departure from their original sound on their first album. In my opinion, their first album was a lot more rooted in like psychedelic and folk elements, and they still hold on to that sort of psychedelic sound for their second album, but they incorporate a lot of fuzzed out guitar work and like heavy riffs, even some orchestral parts. But yeah, I highly recommend that album if you haven't checked it out already. So next up, my only album by this band, uh, the Standells, Dirty Water, uh, the national anthem of Boston, Massachusetts. Um, yeah, can't really say too much about this. Just a pretty classic garage rock album and song. But I would say the album is definitely worth a listen. I know a lot of people just know Dirty Water, and while that's a good song, I think there's much more to not just the Standells, but many other bands than what meets the eye or what gets radio play. Uh, we have Iron Butterfly, Ball, which I know this might not be considered an obscure album, I suppose, because they had a massive worldwide hit in Agata Davida. But I think generally this album is kind of overshadowed compared to their second album. Um, this one probably isn't quite as heavy, but I think the melodies are more intricate, and I don't know. I just think like musically, they probably took a step forward with this album, which makes sense because it was their third album, and Inagata Devito was their second album. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't even know what to say about a lot of these records, but I can't really say much because I have a bit to get through here. So, yeah, but I'd recommend checking all of these albums out if you haven't already. But this one's a great record. All right. Um, I have shown this record before, but the Guess Who, as well as the Staccatos, both Canadian bands. This is an album called Wild Pear. And the interesting thing about this album is that apparently, when it was first released, if you collected Coca-Cola bottle caps and you collected 10 of them specifically, you could trade them in and get this album in return because this album was a promotion for Coca-Cola. And I just thought that was a pretty neat idea. And I wish they had more things like that today, but I don't know. Might have been something unique to the 60s, I suppose. And then another cool little factoid about this album is that it's signed by the Staccatos. So one of the previous owners, I believe, must have had to live in maybe the same community, or I don't know, just been in the right place at the right time, I guess. And what's even more interesting is that I actually found someone on YouTube who commented on a video of a Staccato song, and they claimed that their brother had a copy of that album and he had it signed by the entire band. So I'm like, did I just find the person whose record I have now? Like, that's pretty weird, I think, small world kind of scenario. But this one I picked up quite recently, probably one of my most recent purchases. But Batman, the original 1966 soundtrack, and I picked this up because both me and my dad are, interested in, how do I put this? Like, original superhero series, such as Batman or Superman or whatever you'd like to think of. But yeah, it's pretty short record, only about 22 minutes. It's kind of interesting though because they have like short snippets of audio mixed with instrumentation, but it kind of works overall, even if it sounds somewhat how do I put this, jarring, I guess. So I can't talk as much about each record, but I'm just gonna fly through these. So The Doors, this is an original copy of their self-titled debut album. Yeah, can't really say much about that other than one of the best debut albums ever, likely. As well as this next one, which, again, one of my more recent purchases, Pink Floyd, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I believe this to be a very early stereo pressing of the album from Columbia Records. So I'm very happy to have this. I understand the significance of European psychedelic music, because while you had what was going on in LA at the time, I think really progressive music evolved out of psychedelic music, but specifically the stuff that was going on in England, I think that had a very profound effect on the music that came later, I guess. So anyways, this is one that I showcased earlier, Highs in the Mid-60s. It's Killer Garage album. It's a compilation of bands from Michigan, but I don't think you can read that, but if you can reverse your screen, you might be able to. Yeah, it just gives a bit of history behind some of the suburbs in Detroit and how said teenagers became so engaged with the local music scene. The Seeds, Future, kind of a strange album. I'm not going to say I've never gotten into it before, but it's just a really weirdly mixed album. There's almost no reverb. I don't even know how to describe it. It feels like you're in this kind of like fantasy land, I don't even know. It's like you're in a fantasy land, but you're not tripping, if that makes sense. Like, it's not a psychedelic fantasy land. Like, this just sounds. I don't even know. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, whatever. I'd recommend checking it out, though. Ultimately, I think that the Seeds' first two albums were a bit more organized, I guess. Like, they stuck more to one genre of music. But with that album, they expanded their tastes a little bit and became a bit more eclectic and differential, I guess. Um, Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds. This is a original mono copy of the album. But so one thing I noticed about records printed in the mid 60s is that they're printed very thick. And it even says that on the record itself. It says non-breakable, and I'm like, yeah, I believe that. You know, you look at it and it's like width of your, like, I don't even know, that thick, maybe. Yeah, it's smaller than that, but you guys get the idea. So, but if you think those are thick, I flipped through boxes of 78s before that are like the thickness of like your thumb. It's crazy. I don't know how or really why they had to print them that thick, but I'm sure there was a logical reason behind it. Another garage compilation, Shake It For Me. I uploaded this on my second channel. If you want to find out more about that, then you can look at my community post tab, where I provided a link to that channel where this album was uploaded. Originally, I had uploaded it on this channel, but my second channel is more dedicated to that kind of garage rock stuff, or full albums of these obscure artists. So I figured it would be better suited to that audience, if that makes sense, I guess. Next up, we have another one of the quintessential Los Angeles bands of the 60s, which is Love. Their album Da Capo, which I did a review of. Yeah. Can't really go wrong with any of the first three Love albums, or even the fourth one, really, when Arthur Lee reassembled the band. But I don't know. I think this incarnation of Love was quite underrated, I think, for both their musical abilities and the influence they had on other artists that would follow them. Were they a Los Angeles band? I'm going to say possibly San Francisco, this next band I'm about to show you. Clear Light. Yeah. Again, I'm very thankful to have stumbled across most of these records, you know. Some of them weren't exactly cheap, but you know, I was willing to bargain for it, so so I don't know. I think it was worth it because I listened to them regularly and everything. But people often debate on who invented metal music, but this album happens to have one of the earliest examples, I think, of metal on it, with the song Street Singer. And if you haven't heard it yet, I would highly recommend it. But to me, it just sounds like the roots of metal, essentially. Like, this came before Helter Skelter, before anything the Beatles did that was that heavy. This was released in September of 1967, so that was when the Beatles were in their psychedelic phase, I guess. The Blues Project, Projections. It's an original copy, as were the last two albums. Those were both original copies. Clear Light was stereo, and the Love Da Capo was in mono. This might be... No, it's in stereo. Okay, never mind. I just figured because it was in from 1966. Yeah, Verve Folkways. You can't really go wrong with any of their records. I think um, if you see a Verve Folkways record, I would generally recommend picking it up, um, just because I feel like they were a label who were willing to take risks, and they I don't know, they just featured a lot of uh, very unique and experimental artists. Uh, Johnny Rivers, Realization. This is a bit more folky for the 60s, but with a bit of a psychedelic edge to it. His cover of Hey Joe is one of the best, I think. Just the way he slows it down, and he has that really nice bass and drum groove. Yeah, some classics on here. Summer Rain, The Way We Live, What Difference Does It Make? Yeah. I think out of any of the albums I've heard of his, that's probably the best one. Although I'd have to give his music a more thorough listen. Wheatfield Soul by the Guess Who. This is a Nimbus 9 pressing, so I don't know if that verifies it as a original or not, but I don't know. I don't think Nimbus 9 repressed these. Yeah, one of their strongest albums, I think, and it was their first album, which is pretty impressive if you ask me. Although I know they had been releasing singles up until this point, both with Chad Allen and Burton Cummings as the lead vocalist. Probably my favorite song on here has to be Friends of Mine, just because it's like a 10-minute long psychedelic prog song, essentially, with a lot of Doors influences, but also a lot of unique influences that were unique to them, I guess. It's a Beautiful Day, self-titled, 1969. It's crazy, some of the stuff you can find if you just look in the right places. I found this for like $3 or something like that in the back of this record bin down in Florida when I went for a visit, and I just remember being like slack-jawed that I found that, but knowledge is power, so if you know what to look for, then oftentimes you have the advantage, I guess. The Chocolate Watch Band, repressing of the Inner Mystique. I do really like the Chocolate Watch Band. I just wish their albums were longer. For example, this one's only like 26 minutes, and the last one's only like 26 minutes. So you don't really get a ton of material, but the material that you do get is really good. But I guess, quality over quantity. So, and the first 3 songs on this album supposedly weren't even recorded by the band. They were recorded by studio musicians. Although one of my favorites on this album is actually the first song, Voyage of the Triste, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was the name of one of the submarines to reach the Challenger Deep in the 60s or 70s at some point. But it has a lot of very Middle Eastern sounding influences and instruments. Shades of Deep Purple with some water damage on the back to complete the package. I can't really read the text because it's been wiped out. But the music is still very, very much intact, which is all that matters really to me. They definitely came onto the scene with a bang, though. That's a very solid first album, even though I believe they may have had one too many covers on there. But that's not to deny their prowess already on that record. The Blues Magoos, Psychedelic Lollipop. My memory serves me correctly, this band was from New York. Syndicate of Sound, Little Girl, which was their biggest hit song. And unfortunately, one of the previous owners decided that they hated the text, so they scribbled it out. Yeah, I really wish they wouldn't have done that, but, can't really do much now. Yeah. Yeah, this is a I think this is like a mono promotional copy of this. And even though I don't listen to it all the time, I think it's probably one of the more valuable records here. Now we're moving into some really good stuff. A repressing of Mass in F minor by the Electric Prunes. This album was not arranged by the Prunes. It was in fact arranged by David Axelrod, who was brought in by David Hassinger to kind of attempt to reform the band, I suppose. Although, to me, this was probably one of the earliest progressive rock albums, or like concept rock albums. And I know that's a very heated, in-depth subject. People can get into arguments very easily about who did what in music history. But I just think this was a very, very courageous album to make in 1968, when a lot of bands were still into that, hippie stuff. And these guys come out with an album that's based out of Latin church hymns and still has enough of a psychedelic edge to it that people can enjoy it. But it's also kind of a weird record too. Although the hymns make it so damn catchy. I swear to God. I sound like a nut sometimes when I go out in public, because I just start like humming along to these Latin chants. But I don't know. If you listen to the album, you might understand what I'm going through. So, another Electric Prunes record, Underground. This came out the year before, and to me it was likely the pinnacle of the band's catalog, I would say, because this was the moment when they were able to let their true colors show without any pressure from record executives. They really took advantage of the psychedelic production on this album. But I honestly think it's one of the best psychedelic albums ever, if not one of maybe even the best albums ever. Just there's no duds on this album. The Electric Prunes are just criminally underrated, and I know that word gets tossed around a lot, but I think with these guys it actually applies. Obviously, outside of their hit I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, which, speaking of, I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, their debut album. This is a Canadian mono pressing. Those last two were just repressings I found off Amazon, because a company called Jackpot Records went back through their catalog and remastered a lot of the tapes as part of an anniversary edition. So I picked those up just because they're really hard to find, I think, out in the wild, as I like to call it, I guess. So eventually I just gave up and I was like, you know what, screw it. A record is a record. I'm just going to, order it. So that's exactly what I did. But I was fortunate enough to find this. And this record has quickly grown to be another one of my favorite records of the 60s. When I first listened to it, I may have mentioned this before, but the amount of reverb kind of threw me from the record. But after I listened to it multiple times, I kind of realized that was part of the charm of the record is that the reverb gives it this really like deep kind of emotional sound, I think, that really resonates, I guess. You know, it almost feels like the music is like entering your soul. And I I know that's very like um out there, I guess, maybe statement to make. But it's how I feel about the album, so yeah. So, anyways, moving on, we're going back to the Poppers' first album. Now, this is before Ellis Island. I think honestly, one record isn't better than the other. This album is maybe a bit tighter musically, and it also features Denny Gerard on bass, who was inspiration for Geddy Lee of Rush. And if that doesn't say something about him, I don't know what does. Um, but this album is just a really cool snapshot of the time period. And it was also released on Canada Day of 1967, which is a nice touch. So, yeah, I really like the kaleidoscope effect too on the album cover. This next record I'm going to show, I stumbled onto by accident. I was flipping through a box of records one day. This was over the course of the summer. And I'd already been kind of looking at some records previously the same day. So I was a bit skeptical whether or not, you know, I should even bother looking in the box. And I'm very thankful I did. Because what I pulled out was a record that I very rarely have ever seen someone have a physical copy of. Yeah, I don't really have a good understanding of how rare this album is, but judging from the fact that I've never run into it in the wild before, and I've very, very rarely seen anyone else with a physical copy of this album, I'm going to say it's somewhat rare. This is the Human Beings Evolutions. This was a band based out of Youngstown, Ohio. They released 2 studio albums and 1 live album, but that was a different story. Check out my other video on this channel about why they broke up for more information on that. But this was still sealed when I got it. And it just, again, I was just left with my jaw like agape. Because it was one of those things where I kind of stopped looking for it because like I was kind of like, you know, I'm never going to find it. But then, lo and behold, I found it. And this is a really great, fuzzed out Psych album. Pretty heavy, too, for 1968. Although, again, I wish their albums were longer. That album is... I think 29 minutes and 50 seconds, something like that. Like just under 30 minutes. But also you have to consider the fact that on that album, the songs basically run like right into each other. So I think if you left some open space there between every single song, then you'd probably go over the 30-minute mark. Just barely. Then the Human Beings first album, Nobody But Me, of course featuring the song of the same name, which was their biggest hit. Yeah, I mean, what can you say, you know? Yeah, I enjoy seeing the snapshots of the guys working in the studio, but yeah. It's Smoke Time by The Smoke. This is a limited edition repressing. I should mention too, those Human Beings albums, I believe, are both original copies. No, never mind. I've already shown it to you. But this album actually looks like Smoke, the vinyl, does, anyways. Or never mind. I'll show you guys anyways. Like that. Which I think is a pretty cool touch, I guess, to the correlating band name. And finally, after 30 minutes of rambling, we get to possibly the greatest album ever. I know that's a really, really tough call to make. But this would for sure be on my desert island list if I were to be stranded on somewhere. That is Forever Changes by Love. For anyone who hasn't listened to this, I would recommend it to the utmost level. Just no duds on this album. It's kind of unusual because for I shouldn't even say for a band of that time, but they were just every album they had a different sound. It was like it was very hard to categorize them, and like one of the famous YouTube album reviewers once said, Abigail DeVoe, if anyone watches her channel, there's almost no center of gravity, I guess, to the album. It's like every song is kind of different, and that also applies to every single Love album. Their first album was a bit more garage rock / punk. Their second album started to combine elements of jazz and like Latin music into it. Even maybe dabbling a little bit into prog with, Revelation and songs like that, which was basically just a long jam session. But this third album is much more folk oriented, I think. And for me, that's the one thing that kind of holds it all together. But outside of that, there's nothing. But to me, there's nothing wrong with that. I've never really had a problem with the fact that there's no center of gravity to the album. Because to me, I think if an album's going to be considered one of the best ever, it has to try and encompass everything about music. And Forever Changes covers a lot of the friggin' field when it comes to music. Yeah, I really do not know what else to say. I appreciate anyone who has stuck with me for this long. But those are all of my obscure 60s garage psych albums, not singles. I've got some of those, but I don't know. That would be a video for another day, I guess. But overall, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next